Glad to have you with us. Mike Doloff, Chief Revenue Officer, Inflow Communications. I've got with me Chris Riccio, Director, Contact Center, Advanced Applications. Hey, Chris. As always, good to spend time with you. Welcome back from your cross-country journey. Talking today about a topic that's near and dear. It's kind of part one. We're going to be talking about AI and automation, specifically around one piece of your organization that can benefit immediately and that most people aren't tapping into. So I'm not going to give a spoiler on that. You're going to have to stay tuned. But before we get to that, let's talk about this AI and automation and what are you seeing with organizations? What are you seeing as opportunities here? And then we're going to tie this all back around to that. What's the one spot you should start with if you're not doing today? So kick us off, Chris.
Yeah, this is a really fun topic for me. We talk a lot about contact center, and folks that really have a vision statement about contact center, they're usually thinking about agents and employees with headsets just taking phone calls or taking some kind of communication. What is not being spoken beyond the context of the ACD and maneuvering clients to the appropriate parties is what about all the ancillary work that is associated with handling a specific inquiry. And if you look at the different industries, they're varied and wide. And I think this is the reason why so many partners don't really understand the landscape of contact center. Most of them come to it from a one-dimensional perspective. How do I maneuver the call? Hey, I got skills-based routing. There's really no attention to the detail and the workflow automation that goes along with being part of the contact center piece. And if there is any attention to the workflow, it usually is one thing only. Hey, can I do a screen pop? That is like the lowest hanging fruit possible. There's so much more related to the contact center. I was at a customer this week, and while contact center and the ACD is helpful for them in delivering their customer calls to the appropriate associates, and it's very clear to me that not everybody is a contact center. The term gets bandied around easily because of the ACD component, but it's important to pay particular attention to how heavy is that component. In this case, I would say the ACD is about 20% of their operation. What comes along with what they do in terms of handling customer inquiries is order management. And within the order management process, the initial inquiry for the customer or the initial contact for the customer is usually looking for services and products, and they're placing orders. From there, the order process kicks off a cascade of events that goes from placing the order, confirming the pricing. They may have bulk pricing. They may have pricing based on a specific industry or municipality. And in this case, this contact center is dealing with large manufacturers and municipalities. So it's not the onesie, twosie, easy turnover customer. It's the large enterprise that they're trying to turn over and work with. So a single inquiry could be an email. They have a 5-to-1 ratio on emails, and that's a pretty heavy slant. And when they look at phone calls, it's almost incidental to what they really do. The inquiry for an order starts off, okay, we have a PO. From the PO perspective, now we've got to look at the details of the PO. We've got to look at the products that they're buying because they're highly volatile. There's a chemical interactions they have to pay attention to, but most importantly, they have to look at the product being delivered and make sure that it's something that's under the customer's umbrella. From there, they check quantities and inventories and make sure it's available. Once they've confirmed that the quantities inventory is there, then the next cycle of events is, okay, let's get the order in. They have an SLA for acknowledging the order. Then they have to make sure the quantities are available and commit the order. Once the order is confirmed, notification goes out to the client, and that's at that point the last point of notification. From there, there's another whole cascade of events. Okay, I've got an order. I've got it ready, I've got it queued up, I've got it confirmed. Now I need to get it to logistics. Who's going to deliver that product, and what's the ETA? And does that ETA match the customer's expectation and need? Think of it this way. I think of it this way in terms of when I go to a restaurant. This might tell a little bit about me. If I see the bottom of my glass and the waiter's coming around, I see the bottom of my glass, I tend to get like, well, you're not really paying attention to what I need here. I always like my glass half full. That's the same thing with some of these products and facilities. They cannot afford to have an empty shelf. And so part of the arrangement with that relationship is keep my shelf full. I can't afford to go low, because as soon as I go low, then my demand issue brings up a slew of other issues, which could be thousands of customers. So you're thinking one entity, enterprise, but under that entity is this other cascade of events. So the need to do heavy logistics as part of that initial inquiry, and then to orchestrate this whole behind the scenes scenario. Okay, I need a dispatch. Do I have someone has a dispatch for my proposed ETA? And if I don't, do I have a secondary backup who can take it? And is there a cost differential for doing that increased expedite order because the first party couldn't take it? And that, is there a need to do an approval process before I say, yes, I can get this other person to do it? Because obviously expedited prices have an impact to the client. So is there an arrangement about pricing? From there, once it gets to a truck, what's my ETA for pickup? And then we need to have an acknowledgement of the pickup so I can give a bona fide ETA to the client. And then from there, the client at some point in time may need to find out, okay, where's the status of my order, because they're dealing with something specific in their organization. So the communication channels need to be as tightly coupled as possible. But after watching the organization for just a couple of hours, it's amazing what they've been able to accomplish without some real definitive automation. So it kind of takes to the context of when you're looking at contact centers, not just about a decision for a product. It's a decision for the product and how it branches out into the behind the scenes processes that very few people pay attention to, aside from the screen pop. So that's any questions for me on that, because that was a lot there, but it paints a picture of how diverse contact center truly can be.
Well, I think it speaks to also of that customer experience is not just this interaction with one person. That it might be in some cases a quick transaction, and that's that, right? And I think that's where a lot of people sort of think initially of a contact center or customer experience. It's just that. The reality is this broader customer experience is actually a ton of stuff that's not even real time interaction with the customer. It's happening behind the scenes. It's workflows. It's different departments. It's different systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's all sorts of stuff that make the overall customer experience in this case. The contact center is sort of a focal point, if you will, of that, or the starting point in this case, and maybe the finish point in that. But there's a ton that goes in between it, right? So I think that's really critical to think about. That's on the more complex scale, but there's a lot of organizations that this is very similar with, right? It's sort of a really simple customer service thing where it's a quick question there, back, fine, that's down, fairly transactional and done. But a lot of these other things are not like that, right? There's a lot of interactions and use cases of contact centers that are not just so tight and so clean. And so, so that automation, and I think there's a couple points I want to kind of transition into the what can you, where do you start with this? But one of the points I think, Chris, is the contact center technology itself is not in a silo in a lot of organizations and should not be thought of in a silo in organizations, right? If that system needs to trigger something or talk to something or pass or pull information to something else, this needs to be thought about in the context of that. And I think the modern organization needs to be thinking through all of these things more holistically. We see a lot of stuff that's siloed, and so what people do is they throw bodies at fixing a problem. They've got convoluted, difficult processes that work, right? The company's working, the company's doing well. It could work way better. It could be way more cost effective. It could be much more, instead of hoping that, the thing I always think about is like great, it's a book I read once and about customer experience, and it talks about you don't want your company you want to, obviously companies are striving for great customer experience. You don't want it to be because Joe or Jane puts on their cape every time and just does this heroic, massive effort to create this amazing experience. Because you know what? While occasionally that's appreciated, that's not sustainable, nor is that scalable, right? You want that heroic, amazing customer experience to come because of great systems and processes and great culture too, but it's something that's repeatable and scalable. Right? Joe or Jane putting on their cape every time to like fix all these holes because systems don't talk and there's no processes. That's not sustainable. Guess what happens to Joe or Jane? They hang up their cape and they quit eventually, right? So you don't want that. So I think that's fascinating, and thinking about the contact center in a broader context. And I think that's a shift that organizations are going through or need to go through. So what do you think? So I think that's a great example, fresh on your mind, from a customer you met with recently that has some of these really specific workflows. When it comes to AI and automation in the contact center today, as far as speaking broadly across most contact centers, what's an area, and I know the answer to this, but I want you to talk to this, what's an area that you feel like most contact center parts of the organization could really benefit immediately on when it comes to automation and AI to get a better customer experience, free up time, all the cool stuff. Where do you see that? Where do you see that happening, or where could you see that happening the most?
So we started our conversation about workflows and the behind the scenes type of work, and all of this really relates back to staffing and busy work, finding the time to do the things that are necessary to maintain the customer experience. And aside from the workflow that I talked about a moment ago, there's another piece that where automation and workflow can be extremely valuable. And let's talk about just the customer experience itself. So the one way that you can really tap into the customer experience is through QA, quality monitoring. However, when I visit clients that become busy and they're growing at a pretty even clip, striving to maintain momentum while still handling the organization, they often leave QA off to the side. It's just busy work that when we've got more customers, I've got to focus on the customer. And the message I've said to some of our enterprise clients that I've met in the last 6 months is that, and I've seen the pattern pervasive. As the demands increase, QA gets kind of pushed to the side.
It becomes a nice to have, busy work, right? It's like, hey,
it becomes a nice to have.
Yeah, not a must
exactly.
have. Like, I don't need it to keep the lights on, right? But that's
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
But there usually is a trade-off. Once you disregard that aspect, my message is, if you're short-staffed and you have demands, you need a higher demand on the QA process in conjunction with your staffing efforts. Now, that's a big ask. The QA piece, thankfully, and it just depends on your organization. You have to look at the size of your organization. How many QA processes, and what is your QA process? It's not just about listening to the phone call. It could be about the screen capture and watching data entry input. That's a very valuable piece, especially when you get into compliance organizations such as healthcare or order management such as pharmaceuticals and chemicals, where you're the one responsible for looking at interactions and things of that nature. Those are two aspects. But one of the nice things about where technology is now is that there's fantastic tools to automate some of the managerial type functions. And if it's data-wise, let's talk about QA for monitoring calls. We're going to talk about voice analytics. There's AI processes pointed directly at voice analytics. Let me ingest all of your call recordings. Let me put all the call recording and transcribe it down to the legible word. And now let's categorize the words so we can start seeing what are people talking about? What are the questions that persistently come up? How's my agent responding? That's a great way to inject modern technology into automating some of those managerial functions. Now that's a nice win, because now the manager can spend more time focusing and working side by side with agents and really dealing with clients that there may be escalated issues or escalation issues, while still maintaining that back end piece. Now that does, if you're not doing call recording today, it does require an investment. But thankfully, because technology is growing at a pretty clip, there's some solutions out there that are very cost effective. And when it comes to voice analytics, I know that as soon as I said that, people got very nervous, like, oh no, more technology, more servers. Actually, it's not that bad at all. There are programs out there that are pennies on the dollar to ingest megabytes and gigabytes of your data and spit out information for you in a consumable paper report that's easy to read. It doesn't have to be highly technical. That's one way that I think automation can really work to help you augment your contact center, especially if you're a contact center that's in a growth mode now. If you can get ahead of that curve and implement or at least get a proof of concept going before you hit that, and you can test it out, I think most people will readily see the value. And I'll put it in easy numbers. If you're a manager who is spending 2 hours a day on evaluations because you don't have a full-time QA staff like some of the enterprise folks do, that's 10 hours a week. If you were given back that 10 hours a week, and let's be honest, maybe you won't get the 10 hours back because you're still going to go back and review the data, maybe you'll get 8 hours back. What could you do in those 8 hours that could help the organization while that automation is happening in the background? And that's where AI comes into place. Taking a step further, artificial intelligence can ingest the information, but in real time, can do sentiment analysis, and this is where you start getting sophisticated. Sentiment analysis. What's the sentiment of my agent and their response? What are they saying? And is there a way for me in real time to now start navigating information to them? And now we're getting into sort of like a blended workflow environment. Right now, there's a lot of focus on the desktop workflow, and there are applications now that are available that include that as part of the contact center offering, which is fantastic. And then couple that with AI, now you can get sort of screen pops and hits, hey, say this, offer this, hey, tone it down, or whatever the case is. And I'm just giving loose examples that help the layman just kind of understand it. It doesn't have to be that complicated, but that's where automation, I think, is a great first step. And that's a huge win if you can do all of that data mining without having to listen to 100 calls, because guess what? If the calls you're listening to are 2 hours long, you're spending 2 hours listening to the call. You're probably spending 2 hours now sitting with the individuals and doing a report card, et cetera. The amount of time you could save and still gain value, I think, is tremendous. So that's what I'm thinking in terms of automation. And we're talking about the supervisor role, but there's plenty of things to do on the backside as well.
It's awesome. Yeah, and I think in some cases people might say, hey, wait, are you advocating for throwing out the QA process? Like, nope, time out. That's not it. It's this is something that can ingest all that information and give you insights. In some cases, guess what? Maybe it's you're still going to spend the 10 hours that week because that's valuable and you see value in doing that. But now maybe you can spend those 10 hours on exactly the types of calls or the types of individuals that you've identified as the ones that can benefit the most from focusing on, as opposed to just random. What are the ones that have a strong negative sentiment to them, or ones that a certain word that agent has been trained not to use is being used frequently, and we need to really reinforce this and understand in what context are they using this. So again, maybe I think in some cases really there is a good time saving, but in some cases you might still want to invest that time into listening, but now you can focus specifically on the types of calls that you want to surface up to listen to, right? So I think that's cool. I think something that probably people missed in there too that I think that I wanted to call out was this is something that QA is something that that gets treated as a nice to have a lot of times. And it often gets swept to the side or put to the back burner, whatever your analogy, when you get really busy and you're in growth mode. That's the time that you actually need it more. That's the time when you can benefit the most from it, because as you're growing, there's all these, either new people, bringing them up to speed, all these inefficiencies or potential bad processes are getting introduced, all these things, and now you're taking your eye off of that sort of. So the need for that is even more important. So I think it can feel daunting, right? Oh, there's so much to do. But I think this is one of those areas where technology has really brought in something powerful, but there's a disconnect between people realizing it's there. So I think QA is a great place to focus. I think it's one of those areas for me as a manager, I've looked at, I don't have, everyone's like, hey, how do I get more time in my day? Well, guess what? I haven't figured out that ability to sort of do something magical with the time-space continuum. So until I do, I've got to be more efficient and effective. Well, guess what? If I can have things surfaced up to me that I should pay attention to, which is what I use conversation analytics for, that's important to me. That's an area where I can find, are there gaps in knowledge? What's the customer experience as a whole look like? How's it trending? What are keywords that we've been talking about that are really important to share, and what quantity are those showing up in conversations? Who's saying them more than other people? What are the types of questions people are asking? What's information I can give to our marketing team of how people phrase certain things so we can go out and find other customers that are looking for these things? There's a million things now, and guess what? That didn't take me a lot of time. That didn't take me much time at all. I've got the technology to do it, and now it's on me to spend as a manager in my role, an appropriate quantity of time looking at the data and making decisions based off of that. So I think that's a great place to start. Good. Well, we're going to continue this theme of automation and AI in the contact center. We wanted to start with kind of a broad workflow conversation and then bring it into where can you start in QA is the spot we feel like in a lot of organizations they can start. So treat this as a part one. We're going to come back and visit this again shortly, looking at some other areas where AI and automation is completely ripe and accessible for the contact center to tap into this, get benefit, talk about use cases. So more to come. Thank you as always for tuning in. Please give us feedback, tell us what you like to talk about. If you want to join us on a call like this, join us. We love to talk with people too. So thanks as always, Chris. Thank you. We'll sign off.
Thanks,
Have
Mike.
a good day.
Have a great day.